Hi, everybody. How is everyone? Yeah, I know. I love the hats, too. Well, I'm going to try to do something tonight. It's always been really, really hard for me to try to describe a family that we serve or what they go through, but I'm going to try it tonight so that you may better understand just what your support here does. Pediatric cancer impacts about 1 in 300 kids. This is why you hear about a child being diagnosed in a community the size of Avon Lake about once per year. This is why when we heard another Avon Lake boy being diagnosed just 3 months after Jeremy, because it was against the odds. But it happened. This boy was 12 years old at the time, and he was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. So I want you to just try to imagine with me over the next 7 minutes or so. You're just 12 years old, and you've been diagnosed with cancer. During treatment, you also find out that you have a secondary disease called mastocytosis, and I know I screwed that up. But it's a disease of your immune system, so this complicates everything even more. You're admitted to Cleveland Clinic Children's Hospital, and you begin to go through intense chemotherapy. You're scared. You can't go to school. You can't hang out with your friends. You have to go through 8 intense rounds of chemo. You have many ups, many downs. You're in the hospital, you're out. You have lots of diseases and illnesses that come along with treatment, and a lot of them from this secondary disease. You have fears and everything else that comes along with treatment. But doctors say that magic word remission. And you think you're in the clear. But 16 months later, after your diagnosis date on October 13, 2009, after finally taking a breath, the word you hear is not magic. The word you hear is relapse. The cancer comes back. I remember October 13, 2009, and I remember it really well because it was a frightening day for our family as well. Jeremy was also admitted on this day, but at Rainbow. And we were told that he had either suffered damage to his brain or in his surrounding tissue, or he had relapsed again. If he had relapsed again, the doctors had told us that they had exhausted all options and that we should prepare ourselves. So we actually prayed for brain damage. So just imagine for a moment actually praying for brain damage for your child, because, well, it's the lesser of two evils. Again, what were the odds that these two Avon Lake boys would have received such devastating news on the same day? Our family went through an excruciating 30 days waiting for Jeremy to retest for his MRI. And Jeremy got the lesser of two evils. But this boy's cancer and relapse was confirmed. He now needed a bone marrow transplant. Cleveland Clinic at the time did not perform pediatric transplants, so the family was told they had to go somewhere else. Imagine having to switch medical teams in the middle of all of that. All of the people that you've begun to trust, suddenly you have to leave. The Cleveland Clinic suggested Cincinnati Children's for this family. So now they weren't just leaving their medical team, but now they were moving 4 hours away from home and leaving their family and their friends. This family moved down to Cincinnati, and they moved into the Ronald McDonald House. His mom and dad moved down with him, and his dad did what he could to work out of the Ronald McDonald House for the first 4 months. This boy had to go through additional months of horrible chemo treatments just to get him back into remission so that he could prepare for the transplant. And I don't know what his exact protocol it was at the time, but I can share a few of what Jeremy's was to give you an idea. So imagine, again, that your child is on a chemo. This chemo actually seeps out of his skin. So no matter how weak he is, he has to get out of his hospital bed every 4 to 6 hours, and he has to shower. Because if he doesn't shower, it'll leave chemical burns on his skin. I didn't realize how much I kissed my son's forehead until I couldn't during one of his worst weeks, because if I touched him, I would get it on me. And that is just one of the drugs that some of these kids get to prepare for these transplants. And that's not even what some of the worst stuff that follows. Imagine being on morphine for 3 weeks because you can't eat or drink and your mucositis and your sores are so terrible that they're all over the inside of your body. This is something children should not have to go through. Or, for that matter, a parent to witness a child to go through. In February of that year, on Ash Wednesday, this other Avon Lake boy was admitted for his prep, for his bone marrow transplant. And he looked at his family and he said, Jesus got out of the desert in 40 days. He can help me get out of the hospital in 40 days. So imagine having that kind of hope in your heart for such a young age. And I kid you not, in exactly 40 days, on Easter Sunday, he was discharged from the hospital. After a transplant, go ahead, you can clap. After a transplant, you have to stay near a hospital for at least 100 days for obvious reasons. There are constant doctor's appointments. If you're not at a doctor's appointment, you're admitted for something. So the family had to get an apartment now down in the Cincinnati area. And about 6 weeks into his 100 days, in June of that year, living away from home, this boy heard the word cancer again. This time, it was his mother who was diagnosed with breast cancer. She made the decision to have her mastectomy at a hospital in Cincinnati, still yet away from their family and friends. And she waited to have chemo until she could bring her son home. It's even hard to imagine quite a scenario, isn't it? On August 1st, this boy was cleared to go home to Avon Lake. So they packed up very quickly, and they got home. And the next day, on August 2nd, the mom had her first chemo treatment. And it was none other than her son that prepared her some food and some shakes to get her through. During all of this Avon Lake boy missed 2 straight years of school, practically his entire junior high. And he worked with a tutor, and he went back to school his freshman year. Then, in 2013, when he was a sophomore, the cancer came back. Imagine, this family once again found themselves traveling back and forth between Cincinnati and Avon Lake. 4 days in Cincy this time, 3 days in Avon Lake. He now misses another year of school, but he continues, not just with his medical team, but with a tutor. He's able to obtain remission, but just as remarkably, this boy graduates with his very own class the following year in 2014, even though he missed a collective 3.5 years of school. This remarkable young man's name is Louis Pena, and he has gone on to college. He is currently studying at Baldwin Wallace University and is majoring in public history and minoring in biology. But that's not the whole story. I left something or someone out of my story. You see, Louis is not an only child. He has a younger brother named James, and many times the sibling does get left out. That's why we never forget them. When I think back to my own situation, Don and I really thought, we have this. No matter what, the insurance was with my employer, so Don quit his job so that he could be home. And no matter what, we made sure that somebody slept at the hospital and somebody slept at home every night. And we might not have gotten home, until close to bedtime, but the meal train at that point, the girls, Mary and all them, they had a well-organized machine, and so Ben had food after all. And we literally thought we were rocking it. But I bet if you asked Ben, he would give you a different perspective. What he probably remembers is he was just a 12-year-old boy that came home alone on most days to an empty house. And yeah, he had a meal, but he ate it alone. And I asked Ben constantly if he was okay. And he always said yes. He wasn't. How could he be? So imagine being 12, you're scared and you're alone and you're worried you might lose your sibling or your best friend. But when your mom asks if you're okay, you can't imagine adding any more stress to her. So you lie and you tell her you're fine. Imagine carrying that burden that so many of these siblings do. And your mom, of course, she knows in her gut that it can't be possible. But she's so friggin' tired, and she so desperately needs it to be okay. So imagine James, Louis's brother. He couldn't even sleep in his own room. The 3 people he loved a lot of times were 4 hours away. He didn't even have his bed anymore. They had moved it. And each night after he completed his homework, his uncle picked him up and he spent the night at their house. Collectively, James spent about 1.5 years with his aunt and his uncle. James' life was completely turned around. Days of hanging out at his house with his baseball buddies, well, they were done. I mean, come on, social life is uprooted for these kids. Organized sports become way too difficult to orchestrate. They don't lead normal children lives anymore when their sibling is diagnosed. In James' essay, he describes his uncle and his aunt as a bright light in his darkest days. It was also these dark days that helped young James find his path and his passion. He noticed the powerful difference a good and bad nurse can make in the lives of people who are vulnerable and scared. And he also noticed that there is a shortage of male nurses, so he vowed to make a difference. He kept up his studies without anybody prodding him. Sometimes that meant doing it in a car, back and forth between the 2 towns. But his hard work and his dedication paid off. He is currently a freshman at the University of Akron, commuting as he studies to become a nurse. Most of us in this room tonight will never really, no matter how hard I try to explain it, ever be able to imagine anything close to this. And I say thank goodness. But I have 100 other of these stories, each one unique. These are the people. These are the people that you are helping tonight. We first interacted with this family back on their first Christmas away from home. We loaded up a bunch of sandbags, and I had a girlfriend who lived down in the Oxford area, and she came up here and she got them and she delivered them down to Cincinnati for us. And then I later had the honor of visiting with these 2 boys at their home on the rare occasion that they were actually together, and we got to surprise them with individual iPads. I would like to believe that those iPads helped them with these studies and that helped them stay in touch during those years. And that's not all. These boys have actually volunteered for Jeremy Cares and have paid it forward. They shopped for us one Christmas and paid it forward for another family. This is what your support does. Louis and James actually happen to be guests tonight, but they had absolutely no idea that I was going to talk about them. So they might be feeling a little embarrassed and a little shell-shocked, but I need some help from you. I need you guys to show these 2 incredible young men some Jeremy Cares love and a whole lot of Benny's Buddies encouragement as I ask them to join me, Jeremy, and Benny up front here. I'd let you stand all night, but I'm going to ask you to sit for a little bit of a reason here. Because I want you to get a good look at them. This is Louis here. Raise your hand, Louis. And this is James. And I want you to see who they are. Because I want you to seek these guys out tonight. And I want you to talk to them. I want you to let them know you're behind them. I want you to ask them their stories. Let them know what your support does. Look for them. They're incredible. Their entire family is incredible. And before I leave the mic, Jeremy and Benny have something they'd like to say to both of these young men.
Louis, from one survivor to another survivor, I want to grant you with this $1,000 scholarship from Jeremy Cares.
And James, from one sibling to another, I also am honored to present you with this $1,000 scholarship.
So people, you place those bets tonight. That's what I got to say. You place those bets. Lots of them. All right? Mary, do you have anything you need to